I'm taking that one with me. Give me Jesus, but put the bag in with me. Okay. Tilly is from England. Isn't that a great name, Tilly? She met her second husband through the Sweetheart Ranch magazine out of St. Ignatius, Montana, 15 years ago. She flew to Montana twice to meet him, and the third time she stayed and married him. She has 5 out of 6 surviving children from her first marriage back in England. At the age of 86, she has lost a child, been widowed twice, and has now been told that her COPD is terminal. She doesn't know exactly when her time will come, but she wants to be prepared. So she called my cousin, Susan Marquand. Tilly has always loved the 1920s. Although she missed them by only a few years. At 86 years old, she was born at the end of the 20s. She called Susan, a lifelong seamstress and costume designer creator, to commission a flapper dress and a headband to wear at her final performance, as she called it. Susan even called a mortician to find out if it was more convenient to have the zipper on the side or in the back. It turns out it doesn't really matter. Tilly's flapper dress and headband are fabulous. About as fabulous as this bag here. And you can see them on Susan's Facebook page. You have to friend her though. In all their fringed and sequined glory. I want that dress. Tilly will look awesome when she steps over the cattle grate and through the ranch gates of heaven to be reunited with both husbands and her long-lost baby. Susan and her husband Ian are in town to see their daughters, Adrian and Ashley, whom you will remember as the well-costumed girls who attended the installation, and they made it into the LA Times because their headdresses and everything were so fabulous. Okay. Their mother makes those costumes, which is why they make it into the Times. Anyway, they're currently performing the complete works of William Shakespeare in 2 hours each evening. It's a 2-hour comedy in which they perform all 37 plays abridged in a hilarious romp. And they even do Hamlet backwards. It is excellent. Susan had, of course, made the costumes. And we heard Tilly's story at dinner before the show, which led to a conversation about what we would wear to our last performance. Answers ranging from a cotton nightie to a Batman costume. Can't you just see looking in the costume and seeing a Batman costume? Which leads me to ask, what do you plan to wear in your coffin and why?
I'll be cremated.
Yeah. Well, you gotta wear something to the cremation. I'm going to be cremated too, but I think I'm going to take the purse with me. Okay? What else? What would you wear?
Terry cloth head. I'd like to be comfortable.
A terry cloth head. Yeah. Man. What else? Anything else?
I don't know, but I'm going to start thinking about it.
Okay. Got to be prepared for these things because we step through the gate, you know? Thank you.
My best friend, who was an artist, when she was in the hospice, one of the works that she had made, she was a sculptor, one of the works she had made, she had sold to Diane Ladd. It was a fountain for Diane Ladd's house, and Diane Ladd paid her while she was in the hospice. And so she took the money and threw this tremendous garden party. And she had this great dress made, and she had lost all her hair, so I got her this beautiful scarf that she wore, and she, she had this party, this wonderful party. People came from all over. There were like 100 people there at this hospice. It was in the hospice, and out in the garden.
Wow.
But
see? Throw your party before you go. Okay. Cool. I can just see all of you laid out side by side in your choir robes. Okay, not gonna happen now. So, much like the play last night, and often like transitions from life to death, I have no segue here. So I'm gonna start over. Except to say that what we wear to our own funerals doesn't really matter in the long run. does it? It's kind of fun to think about, but it doesn't matter. What David, in the text, blissfully unaware, wore to his anointing ceremony as future king of Israel was a nondescript shepherd's costume, perhaps filthy from a day's or week's worth of work out in the pasture with the sheep. Can you imagine going to be anointed as king with sheep dung clinging to your clothing? Samuel, following God's instructions, went looking for an obviously kingly person and kept thinking the older sons of Jesse were the best choices. But in verse 7, God says, "Do not look upon his appearance or on the height of his stature, because I've rejected him," the older son. "For the Lord does not see as mortals see. They look on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart." Ironically, upon David's entrance in verse 12, what does the text say?
He was handsome.
Oh, he's so handsome. Yeah. He was ruddy and had beautiful eyes and was handsome. The Lord said, "Rise and anoint him, for this is the one." Wink, wink. It's as if we're being reassured. Davy may be the youngest, shortest, worst dressed, least likely, but there was something kingly about his appearance in the end, beyond his worthy heart, which only God can see. Appearances. Oh. Okay, what did that mean?
He left for his state.
God's saying, keep all of this inside the room. I don't want the rest of the people to know. What happens at church stays at church. Appearances matter to us. They do. We humans jostling for position and power on the planet, hoping to be remembered for something. I'm going to remember Tilly for her dress. But also because she moved to Montana for some guy she'd only met 3 times. So God messes with our heads by choosing partners who don't meet our expectations, who are more than they seem, rough around the edges, flawed in some way, or socially unacceptable. David was the 7th or 8th son of Jesse, depending on which text you read, because this story is told twice. First Chronicles is the other one. And Jesse also had a couple of daughters. This is a motif in world folklore that the 7th son surpasses all the others, and humbly triumphant over their sense of entitlement. We're older, we get more inheritance. Right? It is a motif similar to most backstories you hear about Olympic athletes. Right? He was the runt of the litter. She grew up in poverty. They overcame cancer, abuse, crime, family affiliations, whatever. And through the sacrifices of parents or siblings or a coach who mentored them, made it to the top, winning the gold against all odds. Right? Backstories, they're always full of that kind of stuff. The David story is an early one in the same tradition. So is the Moses story, an adopted child with a speech impediment, who early in his manhood murders a guy in a blind rage and lives on the lam for years before being called up by a bush for the Liberator job opening. Right? So is the Jesus story. Another God-anointed king, somehow maybe distantly related to David, selected from the riffraff, a child of questionable parentage, maybe mentally ill, but definitely charismatic, a working-class stiff who doesn't even carry a change of clothes when he travels. So much for God, right? Yeah. I wonder what Jesus would have picked out to wear to the tomb if he had known that was the day he was going to die. Maybe a flapper outfit? Yeah. For the sake of our tradition, he was basically buried in the swaddling clothes he was wrapped in at birth, allowing our imaginations to go with the motif of rebirth and conquering of death, the ultimate victory over that which holds a sense of entitlement over the rest of our lives. But I digress. Stepping into Easter before we even left Bethlehem. All this David stuff happened in Bethlehem. The point of the text, which even contradicts itself. Don't look at the face, look at the heart. But God, it's handsome. The point of the text is that we might want to look beyond appearances into the heart of a person, because that is where God hangs out, looking for partners to do the important work. The meaningful tasks of shaping motley groups of people into beloved communities. Shepherding resources to make sure everyone has enough. Protecting the vulnerable and shaking down the tyrants, acting out divine ethical mandates in a world diluted and diluted by a fascination with appearances. A planet disintegrating fast in the wake of humanity's poor choices and our sociopathic sense of entitlement. What makes me better than a polar bear? That's what I want to know. That purse makes me better than a polar bear. Not. The ancient Hebrew people were not the most cultured or wealthy or populous or popular people on the planet. They didn't even have a land to call their own until they settled in Canaan, and even that is called into question to this day. The ancient Hebrew people were herders and wanderers, outcasts and slaves, and recognizing a partnership with their Creator, they lived into their claimed identity as chosen children of God, a chosen people. The text in the Tanakh, Hebrew Bible, from what we would call Deuteronomy 7, verse 6, actually reads, "For you are a holy people to the Lord your God. The Lord your God has chosen you to be his treasured people out of all the peoples on the face of the earth. God has chosen you to be his treasured people." This riffraff was chosen to be God's treasured people. Like a youngest child, or a sibling with disabilities, or a friend who has made poor choices but has turned over a new leaf, these are the ones God chooses to do important work in the world. The sadder your backstory, the more intrigued God becomes with your purpose. God has favorites, and they are usually the ones with low self-esteem and very little social capital. Codependents are high on the list, everybody. They are middle children, the mentally ill, the so far survivors of cancer and single parenthood and infertility and job insecurity. Sure, the future King David was handsome and had beautiful eyes and skin. But he didn't let that stop him. He committed adultery, murdered the husband of his mistress, suffered the moral consequences, lived down his own history, and wrote a lot of poetry. And somehow he did a pretty good job of ruling an unruly people with justice and mercy. And down the line, one of his great-great-greats instigated a political insurrection that led to the establishment of a religion that had and continues to have its own set of problems, including a sense of entitlement that needs to be rooted out of its heart before God can work with it again. I love Tilly, a woman who chose a Montana rancher over a quiet retirement in England. A woman who's preparing to meet her maker in a flapper dress and chose my cousin Susan to dress her for her final performance. And I love David, a backwater boy who was entitled to nothing and was anointed by God to win a gold medal and be king in spite of his pretty face and moral flaws. And I love this beloved community, filled with riffraff. Look around you. Filled with riffraff and codependent people struggling with questions of meaning and mortality, along with the inescapable weight of daily life and family issues and urban insanity. May God choose each of us and all of us as partners in this divine project, whatever it turns out to be. May we grow hearts large enough and loving enough to do the job justice. And may we meet God at the gate, dressed perfectly for the parts we have played in repairing the world, one person, one community, one planet at a time. Okay?
Okay.
Okay.